This week on the agenda, Pakistan's climate crisis. Is the world doing enough to help the millions of people forced from their homes by devastating floods? Cataclysmic floods and heavy rains across Pakistan in recent weeks have left around a third of the country underwater. 33 million people have been affected and more than 1,500 people have already lost their lives. And with fears of waterborne diseases growing, those are unlikely to be the final figures. Much needed aid for Pakistan, along with the issue of climate change more generally, is high on the agenda at the latest United Nations General Assembly in New York. And joining me now from there is Pakistan's Minister for Climate, Rehman.
Hi.
Officials are calling it a climate disaster of epic proportions, and the scale of the devastation in Pakistan is standing out even in a year of extreme weather events. Describe the situation in Pakistan right now.
Yes, it's absolutely been a devastating time for all those impacted, their families, and it's been actually quite a brutal time for everyone in Pakistan because it caused the kind of devastation we've never seen before, nor were we expecting any level of it. It inundated 1/3 of the country underwater, much bigger than the super floods we saw in 2010. And it has started obviously raising questions on how countries like Pakistan, on the front line of the climate disaster and change momentum, are going to face down this level of disruption, not just to our people, but to our homes, their shelters, their livelihoods, and our economy. It's going to be very difficult, even after the relief effort, which is extremely protracted, is over, to rehabilitate people and get their lives back in any shape to face a fragile future. Vulnerability to climate has not been a new thing for Pakistan, neither have monsoons been a new thing. But what we saw through July and August, and literally 11 weeks of uninterrupted torrential downpours from the sky, it's like the sky opened up in a biblical flood, in the south of the country particularly, has left everyone astounded and reeling in shock. So planners, governments, relief teams, everybody has been scrambling for now 2 months to get people to dry land in Sindh and Balochistan particularly, because you still have an uninterrupted horizon of water. You have huge new lake that's formed in the middle of the southern province of Sindh, just inundating all crops, hospitals, all brick and mortar, and it's become an unprecedented climate-induced challenge as well as climate-induced migration for us to deal with. Women and children quite disproportionately impacted and unable to even get to healthcare facilities where their maternal and other needs are to be met, their reproductive health needs are to be met.
You mentioned Sindh province. In the south, it's had 464% more rain over the past few weeks than the 30-year national average, well, for the region. I mean, what is causing that kind of exceptional rise?
Well, it's not actually just 400%. Now, if you count the 11, 12 weeks, the average goes down, but all of August saw 700%.
Wow.
That is, yes, absolutely cataclysmic. And the new, the models, the climate scientific modeling that is coming in, and you may have heard of it a few days ago, attributes most of this weather, extreme weather, to climate-induced patterns, and is not shy about saying this is climate-induced catastrophe. So naturally questions are being asked as to why this is happening to Pakistan, including the 4 heat waves that we saw before this, where we crossed 53 degrees centigrade. We became the hottest country in the planet, areas in the planet, And that's become a very difficult temperature to live at, even for short whiles, because around it you have very high temperatures. You have our glaciers melting, and I don't know if you know, we have a very unique topography. The glaciers are the largest number outside the polar region, and quite magnificent. But when they start to melt, they create a glacial lake outburst floods, which impacts vulnerable communities and livelihoods in the north. And in the south, you have first desertification brought about by the heat. And then you have this kind of epic, catastrophic flooding
Yeah.
that leaves nothing, that leaves no dry land for even people to pitch their tents on.
You talk about the flooding. Floodwater now covers 100,000 square miles, which is an area larger than the whole of Great Britain. Is there any chance that those flood levels are going to recede before that crucial planting season in October?
That's a very, very good question. And that's the one thing that's been worrying not just our food security ministries, but people everywhere, because the Indus has not really, the waters have not receded at the pace and level we need them to for that sowing season. As you know, a lot of people in Pakistan rely on agriculture, and we don't want to be importing expensive commodities at a difficult time like this. So it's been hard. The Sindh chief minister says that most of it should be gone by December, but as you know, we will be probably missing that sowing season. They're going to try to make the best of other areas that are dry. They're going to try to make the best of what soil they can use, but people are uprooted. The actual crop damages are still being estimated. They're going to run into billions. And more importantly, they have removed from them a breadbasket for a householder as well as for the country.
As you mentioned, it's not just rainfall, it's glaciers melting. I'm wondering, are there any early warning systems or protective infrastructure that could reduce this, that maybe Pakistan could have been investing more heavily in since the last devastating floods?
Well, I don't know where we would get the investments from. It's a vexed question at the UNGA and all other forums coming up, even at COP, and I'm late for a meeting right now on that, because climate financing and some level of compensations from countries that are actually adding to the greenhouse gas emissions that create this global warming is long overdue. I mean, we are less than a 1% emitter, and so people are baffled as to why we have to create the level of adaptation, reconstruction required, which will go into billions of dollars. Yes, of course, we would love to do that. We have protective structures in the north because of the glaciers, melting slowly, and those are detectable. There we were able to save lives, but we were not able to save infrastructure like, small hydro plants as well as bridges. But in the north, we were able to literally save a lot of lives, most lives, in fact, despite a tripling of our glacial lake outburst floods this season, because we have community systems where we've trained people to understand when these outburst floods could happen, when the lakes would burst and bring the boulders down in a very angry torrent with them. So that's something that we have been able to manage, but it's still ripping out, it still rips out when a glacier sends down a burst lake, an ice flash flood. What it does is it just rips out bridges like twigs in front of it, and that's been happening. So while we have built back better in some parts of the north, like, higher bridges from 2010, which were the area of traditional flooding in Pakistan through the river and not the sky, we have not been, frankly, I mean, we've had over 12,000 kilometers of just metal road ripped out of the country. How, please tell me, would Pakistan, with our supply chain disruptions, with our import bills rising, with our livelihoods gone, our productive capacity is impacted, our railroads half gone, and our crop gone, how are we going to pay for the the resilient infrastructure
Yeah.
that is badly needed, and that should be coming through a process of what is known as adaptation in climate change. There's no real funding or appetite for adaptation, and that's what we're fighting for over here.
So what immediate help do you need? You're at the United Nations General Assembly. You've asked for some emergency aid along with the United Nations. What are you hoping to get out of it now?
So, well, hope is not a plan. We are looking for better planning, and we are looking for some sense of prioritization for countries. Then we're not alone in this, in facing what I call the rents, the costs, paying the costs in terms of humanitarian payloads for other people's pollution. So yes, we will have to build and keep rebuilding not just our country but our lives. And in doing so, the UN has made a fantastic humanitarian appeal. The Secretary General has been stellar and clearly very driven by the moral core of his mission. But it should not be a disaster relief effort only that mobilizes all the G20 and others, to understand that if climate change is going to wreak ravages in the countries nearer the equator, even though they don't pollute as much, this won't stop. This is going to be an accelerated process, and it's going to be a decisive decade for action on meeting already pledged targets, not just on financing, but also on cutting down emissions, so that slowly the warming comes down. As you know, greenhouse gases stay in the atmosphere years even after the emissions have stopped.
Well, Prime Minister Sharif's government, along with the United Nations, has asked for $160 million in emergency funding. So what immediate support do you still need?
Well, let me give you a figure here. The $160 million are something that we've already repurposed for immediate humanitarian relief. And the 160 million at the UN will be filling some kind of gaps in the huge need on the ground. I mean, 33 million people without food and shelter and scrambling for healthcare now as the waterborne diseases spread is not easy to service. And initially, our disaster relief efforts were also slow and sent. Normally, we use helicopters to search and rescue people, marooned people, families, and that's the norm in non-disaster relief operations. But this time, the cascade from the sky, the cloudburst was just prohibitive. The helis couldn't take off, so you still see a ludicrous, but it's tragic to see the Navy, Pakistan Navy, operating constantly inside the country, rescuing people. It's a real, it's really anomalous, and it makes us say and feel that this catastrophe is like a message from nature. I quite agree with the Secretary General who says we waged war against nature. And now I'm saying this is a message that nature has said, and it's been sent at our doorstep via Pakistan. Please read the signs and form strategies to mitigate and adapt against such tragedy in the future. The countries that are in the front line, many of them are part of the G77 plus China group, are already seeking loss and damage as part of a financial agenda item for COP27. It was not put in last time, despite a lot of discussion. It just went on as a discussion. But we would like it as a formal financial transfer agenda item, because loss and damage is really the way forward. It's part of the Santiago proposals, and we cannot keep on now saying that, countries have to do this on their own while others pollute. Countries are at risk from all kinds of climate shocks, and we should be only seeking humanitarian relief, the whole, even for humanitarian relief, because it's climate induced. There should be financial instruments outside even the UN system, because why should this be a charity model of resource transfer. These are rents we are paying for other people's carbon profligacy.
So if this is a message from nature to the world, what's your more general take on the international response to the catastrophe that's been happening in Pakistan?
International response generally could have been more strong, but there are distractions. Many countries, including China, United States, all have come in, and many countries have been actually deeply sympathetic, have come in, have condoled, have been shocked at the scale of what they see. No, they say that no video can bring up what they see on the ground. So yes, there have been excellent bilateral responses, but the heavy lift on resource sharing and transferring the relief needed has been slow. I mean, the conflict in the heart of Europe, Eurasia, takes up a lot of bandwidth, for instance, and as you know, the donor fatigue for disaster management, for even the Horn of Africa and other countries that are suffering the cataclysms of climate change is quite high. But I don't think that the intent isn't there, or everybody's heart is in the right place. But as I said, hope is not a plan. We need to be timelining our efforts and putting formal mechanisms in place to both mitigate, meet the pledges articulated, and also prioritize adaptation for countries that are the ground zero of climate change.
Following a meeting with China's President Xi Jinping in Uzbekistan for that SCO summit, your Prime Minister, Shahbaz Sharif, said the two had discussed the climate crisis and the agenda and had agreed to cooperate closely to advance shared objectives. What do those shared objectives look like to you?
Well, I think China's been, the People's Republic has been a long-standing close friend of Pakistan in many eras and many ups and downs. And I have no doubt that a close cooperation will entail a menu of joint actions that the countries can take. We have lots of to learn from China's capacity to create infrastructure in short intervals that we all know about. And we are open to all, not just technical capacity, which is very needed, but all infrastructure advice. We are open to human resource assistance, and obviously needed. And obviously the level of grant-based transfers of resources that are needed. I hesitate to call it aid because I don't see it as aid.
Something we've been talking about is donor fatigue. And a recent report in the UK noted that $880 million was raised in just a day and a half after the Notre Dame fire in Paris. Pakistan, meanwhile, has to beg for international aid. Why do you think there's that disparity?
Well, this is galling, and these are political decisions, which is why we are insisting that climate financing, and which is linked intrinsically to climate justice and the bargain between the global north and the south, that resources need to be transferred to countries that bear the brunt of climate stress but don't actually pollute. It needs to work. It should not be about aid. It should not be about having to run to seek aid. This is this should be built into the structural architecture of climate negotiations and climate responses as the world moves forward. Otherwise, no one will be able to do anything alone. And to say to us that I understand governments are very cash-strapped everywhere. The pandemic has sobered many minds, but clearly not enough. And it's been a difficult time for just the human race to come to terms with the changes we see in our biosphere as well. Many countries have been impacted. And in all of this, I just have to say that money is very much in the system. The markets have it. and markets are ultimately, big oil and gas has it. They're ultimately invested within national borders, and they also are large conglomerates operating in the world. Just that, if you see the latest Oxfam report, it tells you just 18 days of their profits, less than 18 days, will be able to cover the cost of the entire UN humanitarian appeal for 2022, which is almost $50 billion.
So,
48. Yeah, so the money is
yeah.
there. It's a question of how you resource it, how you, what architecture is created, but it won't just happen on its own, and this aid model isn't working.
Sherry Rehman, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Still to come here on the agenda. From floods to famine, is starvation the next threat for the people of Pakistan?
Roger, making loud and clear.
We can try out the wild and the crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we're trying to save the world.
Oh, no.
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
Welcome back to the agenda. The floods in Pakistan have destroyed huge swathes of agricultural land, and there's now real concern that the country's economy and food security is facing devastation too. Well, joining me now from Karachi is Kaye, Country Director for the United Nations World Food Programme. Thanks for coming on the show. Now, economic crisis, double-digit inflation, the price of basics soaring, farmers were struggling to make ends meet already. These floods couldn't have come at a worse time for Pakistan, could they?
It's a real concern. You will have seen from various estimations over the course of the past 10 days or so that have been made on the overall costs for recovery, ranging from between 10 and 50 billion US dollars. The assistance community is led by the World Bank, is currently undertaking a post-disaster needs assessment, which will go into some detail to estimate what needs to be done and at what cost. You know, what you're inferring, that, you know, the situation is such that Pakistan really is struggling before the floods, and certainly with the economic and political instability, really don't have firm foundations for a clear-sighted and linear recovery, such as that we might have in a more stable situation. So what does that infer? It means that Pakistan needs the support of the international community, no question about that, to provide needed resources that will ensure it and the 230 odd million population doesn't slip further behind or even worse into chaos.
Chris, there are fears that after the floods there could come famine, a real threat then to Pakistan's food security. I mean, how likely is that, and how could it be avoided?
Yeah, famine is a very frightening word. Certainly for anybody who works for the World Food Programme and understands, if we get to a point of famine, we have failed. The World Food Programme exists in order to ensure that famine doesn't happen. We have contributed, I think, to avoiding famine in a whole variety of different parts of the world over the course of the last several years, particularly. But there's no question, and it's been well documented, increasingly understood, that is a major global challenge in terms of food security. Whether it's caused by war, whether it's increasingly now caused as a result of climate change or the impacts of climate change. We think about the situation here in Pakistan. Pakistan is a major food producer. It has been food secure in the past. It has struggled in recent years to maintain that level of food security, i.e. producing enough to feed its own population. It is now having to import food to the tune of $8 billion on an annual basis, which is a huge drain for a country as cash-strapped as it is. But nevertheless, the amount of food that it does produce, and we've heard from the Food Ministry that it does have sufficient amount of food stocks in the country to provide for the numbers of people who are flood affected. So famine, I like to believe, is unlikely, but you're right, it is a possibility. It's always a possibility. The fact that there is hopefully enough food in the country to go around, the problem is much more associated in terms of whether people can actually afford to purchase the food or access it. And this is in part where we come in as an organization, because with the right funding support through and from our donors, we can ensure that those who are most acutely vulnerable don't slip through the net or are completely left behind. And we can enable food to get to those parts of the country which are either very cut off or inaccessible, and where markets are maybe not working as well as they can. But it is a function often with very impoverished populations of ensuring that they have the finances, the funding where they can actually purchase the food that is available. So, yeah, it's a threat. Is it likely? No, it can be avoided, but it does require, again, a concerted effort by organizations like ours and many other international partners.
We've been talking about extreme weather events, the impacts of climate change, geopolitical tensions, all of these things contributing to the problems we're seeing in Pakistan and beyond. Which brings me on to the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, which the Melinda and Bill Gates Foundation has pointed out that nearly every indicator of is way off at the halfway point. The achievability is 2030. So I mean that's not good news for the world. How helpful is it to have goalpost milestones like that?
Oh, I mean, it's incredibly helpful. I mean, we wouldn't be having this conversation if those milestones didn't exist. You wouldn't be able to challenge me or challenge anybody within the government to understand how those milestones can be attained. We need to have those measures. We need to have those indicators against which we can then hold ourselves accountable collectively as a global community. The fact that we're not meeting them is obviously a major concern, and all it does is steel organizations like mine to do more, to do better, to ring bells more vociferously, to cry more loudly, to get the resources that can help governments and communities to improve in the various areas that are being measured. So whether it's around food security, whether it's around health, whether it's around gender-related indicators, and so on and so forth.
Chris Kaye, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
You can watch every episode of The Agenda in full on CGTN Europe's YouTube channel. And for exclusive extra content from me, my guests and the rest of the team, don't forget to check out The Agenda Show on TikTok. Coming up on a future agenda, another climate crisis. As Europe suffers its hottest summer on record, how can the continent cope with a continued water shortage? But for now, from me, Juliet Mann, and from all of the Agenda team here in London, goodbye.